Hey, how are you, Ariel? Good morning, everyone. I am Amani Jamal. I am the Dean of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the official launch of SPIA in New Jersey. Thank you for allowing us. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to host you at this signature event. New Jersey is one of the most populous and influential states in the Union. Here at Princeton, we are honored to be from and of New Jersey. 16% of Princeton University undergraduates graduated from high school here. Like all of you, we are proud of the many strengths of our home state, like the fact that New Jersey contains one of the most diverse cities in our nation. Indeed, there are more languages spoken in Jersey City than any other city in the country. Yet we are also clear-eyed about the challenges we face. Alongside our enviable levels of diversity, we are cognizant that New Jersey ranks 11th in overall levels of economic inequality among US states. We at SPIA take seriously our obligation to bring to bear the intellectual resources of our school to better the lives of our neighbors. That is why I made greater engagement with New Jersey policymaking a strategic priority of the school. This morning, you will hear from a distinguished group of New Jerseyans from across the political spectrum who have made meaningful contributions to residents and communities in our state. Their presence here today reflects our commitment to take a research-driven, nonpartisan approach to promote policies that foster racial, economic, and social justice statewide. On a personal level, I am a transplant to New Jersey who has raised a family here. My children have grown up, attended college here, and now make their homes here in the state of New Jersey. Our state is home to one of the largest immigrant populations in the United States. We are self-selected New Jerseyans by choice. I am very proud to renew the historic commitment of the school in this new era with fresh challenges and to launch a research-based program that seeks to advance the well-being of my fellow Garden State residents, especially those who have been historically marginalized, exploited, or underserved. Fundamentally, SPIA is about relationships. SPIA in New Jersey is about relationships. It is about strengthening existing connections and initiating new ones. Such partnerships, old and new, we know will be critical to aid the development of a stronger and more just New Jersey, in which everyone can live up to their potential. Again, welcome to SPIA. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Stacy Mann, lecturer and founding director of SPIA New Jersey. Stacy, the floor is yours. I love your colors.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amani. Whew, what a dean. It's really a distinct pleasure to be here with you all today. You probably didn't see the very fine print, but by your presence here today, you are key members and players in SPIA in New Jersey. So thanks for that. Each of you is a bright star in New Jersey's public policy constellation. You are intrepid advocates, activists, organizers, researchers, teachers, funders, elected officials, and policymakers. You're luminaries all. I need to shout out Congressman Leonard Lance, who's here. Congressman, there he is. And Commissioner of the Department of Labor, Rob D'Angelo, where are you? Thanks. You use your power to advance knowledge and the public good, and you know that in a healthy democracy, our fortunes are intertwined. Today, with democracy under attack on all sides, an auditorium full of people who value research, who know that facts matter, and budgets are statements of our values, is itself reason to cheer. By way of introduction, Dean Jamal asked me to say a few words about the path that led me here, and I'll do that. I'll try to do it briefly. I'm the granddaughter of a refugee to the US who supported her family while getting her BA at City College in New York City, which was pretty free at that time. I'm the daughter of a Rutgers grad, BA NJD, also mostly free education at that time. And I myself studied at Clark University, which is a liberal arts school in Worcester, Massachusetts, a gritty post-manufacturing city. At Clark, we students were encouraged to embrace engaged learning as a responsibility, a priority, and an opportunity. And that really lit the flame for me. I first dipped my toes into the world of public policy and social science at the Russell Sage Foundation in New York City, where I met a few of the luminaries who are here today. You know who you are. We swilled fine wine and we talked about social ills. It was the 90s. For my dissertation in history at Northwestern, I examined the range of safety net policies lawmakers considered during World War II. Of course, the winning policy to emerge from those struggles was the GI Bill, the behemoth that catapulted people like my grade school educated grandfather into a white, male-headed middle class. And he was grateful for it. I took that PhD and dove deep into all things New Jersey as a policy analyst at NJPP, that's New Jersey Policy Perspective, where I wrote reports in support of increased funding for public higher ed, lower excise taxes, and tuition assistance for undocumented students. From that crew of wonks, and again, well represented here today, I learned how to write to be understood. Named by Governor Corzine to the first New Jersey Commission on New Americans, I met another slew of smart New Jersey changemakers, although the body collapsed amid the political winds. It was really at Rutgers, that most sacred public New Jersey institution, that I got to exercise my community engagement muscle again. As director of the program on immigration and democracy, I worked with colleagues to map the immigrant infrastructure of New Jersey, and I met some of the toughest and kindest fighters around. Together with faculty, students, alumni, and staff, we pioneered something called Citizenship Rutgers, which was a tri-campus collaboration that delivered free, high-quality immigration legal assistance to green card holders statewide. And every one of those events was like a party. It's a beautiful thing. Academia, in theory, rests on three pillars: teaching, generating knowledge, and service. SPIA in New Jersey aims to marry all three of these, and it's our hunch that all three will come out the better for it. Collaboration, as you heard, is the cornerstone of this endeavor. Bridges, platforms, whatever infrastructure metaphor you choose, connection is our MO. With internships, fellowships, visiting faculty, research collaborations, the possibilities are thrilling and nearly infinite. By far, the best part of getting this off the ground has been the conversations I've had over nearly 2 years about values, fears, priorities, and our hopes for the future. Every person I talk to wants to be a part of building a New Jersey where prosperity is shared. In that vein, I encourage you during the breaks today, over the lavish spread out there, to chat with people whose faces are unfamiliar to you. Make friends. It's partly what we're here for. If you don't already know, let me happily inform you that Princeton University is evolving, and our students, as the dean said, 16% of whom graduated from New Jersey high schools, are leading the way. In just the past month, I've met a student who graduated from a Vo-Tech high school in a blighted environmental justice community near Camden, an undocumented student who was the only income earner in their family during the pandemic, and a young person who transferred to Princeton from a community college in the Caribbean and has to miss a week of class every semester so that she can go jump out of airplanes as a reservist with the National Guard. Like all our students, they bring to the study of public policy avid curiosity and significant aptitude. Their lived experiences, too long left out of policy conversations, add essential perspective to our conversations, and they too are rolling up their sleeves to engage. To close, I want to tell you very briefly about the organic origins of SPIA in New Jersey. It stems from an unlikely set of friendships. It was late summer 2020. COVID had us in its grip, and the uprisings around the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor had galvanized the country. A lot of us were in the streets. Around then, I had the great fortune to meet Sherrod Smith, an MPA student simultaneously working on a law degree. Sherrod joined the Civil Rights Commission of Princeton to fill his copious spare time. We began working together on a range of related issues tied to public safety and equity. I then had the great fortune to meet Matt Malechko, a doctoral candidate in population studies and demography. In the early days of Princeton Mutual Aid, that was where we met. A coalition of neighbors had come together to help people stay fed and housed and to push for a just response to COVID and beyond. That following fall, we learned that Dean Amani Jamal would be taking the helm at SPIA. In her stump speech outlining priorities for the school, we had heard phrases and ideas that piqued all of our interest. Sherrod proposed we ask for a meeting, giving an indication of the kind of leader she is, a person with tremendous expertise who also asks questions and, crucially, listens. Dean Jamal took that meeting, and then she took another. Over the months that followed, Matt, Sherrod, and I surveyed what peer institutions and departments were doing. We sketched plans and built a case for a New Jersey program at SPIA, very much like the one launching today. Professor Heather Howard soon joined the fray, offering her own experience as Chief Policy Counsel in the governor's office. Heather has fueled and guided SPIA New Jersey in ways too numerous to count. Around that same time, Udi Ofer was planning his own policy clinic. National in scope, that clinic is now very much a thriving concern, making evident that the commitment to engage learning here at SPIA extends beyond the Hudson and the Delaware. Institutions move slowly. The ivy on the buildings is a hint. And the challenges to multiracial democracy at this time are daunting. But with our intrepid students, committed faculty, visionary dean, and you, I'm convinced we can do great things together. Organizer Miriam Kaba had it right when she said, "Everything worthwhile is done with other people." We're delighted you're here. We can't wait to listen to, learn from, imagine with, and work and grow with you. Now, to tell us about a previous chapter when the school made a commitment to the state, please welcome SPIA alumnus and chair of the board of the Fund for New Jersey, Mr. Richard Roper.
I guess this might be called a brief history of time at this institution. In 1979, when the Woodrow Wilson School established the Princeton Urban and Regional Research Center, the school's Center for New Jersey Affairs, which had been created earlier in the 1970s, became the Program for New Jersey Affairs and was folded into the new Urban Center. The New Jersey Focused Initiative had struggled to establish a solid footing initially. It was envisioned as a vehicle for Princeton students interested in public policy formation and implementation at the state and local levels to pursue those interests. The program, which was fully resourced by the school, was expected to enable students to explore, examine, and experience the policy-making process by using the state of New Jersey as a working laboratory. Students could observe government operations up close and interact with people responsible for the functioning of government. After the program was made a component of the Urban and Regional Research Center, it took on new life and started to function as its proponents hoped it would. Donald E. Stokes, a pioneer in the development of modern political science, who in 1974 became the third dean of the school, was among those who had high hopes for the New Jersey initiative, as were school domestic policy faculty members Michael Danielson, who helped modernize the study of local government in the U.S. and abroad, Jameson Doig, a specialist in transportation politics, and Julian Wolpert, a highly regarded urban planning expert. The appointment, however, of Richard P. Nathan, a nationally recognized federalism scholar, as the founding director of the Urban and Regional Research Center was of particular importance to the invigoration of the program. He helped heighten its visibility in the school. Nathan believed deeply in the value of scholars actively engaging with public sector practitioners. He felt that interacting with the people on the front lines who were responsible for making government work was essential to understanding the mechanics of sound policy development. The New Jersey initiative, the New Jersey program, fit perfectly with his vision of how domestic policy should be investigated. Over nearly a decade and a half, the program organized topical seminars, conducted workshops, arranged student internships, organized conferences, and sponsored guest speakers that linked the school to New Jersey's public policy infrastructure. The school students got to immerse themselves in issues that shaped quality of life considerations in urban and suburban communities across the state. Indeed, the range of policy areas explored was exhaustive. Among them were environmental quality, education, transportation, land use, budgeting, revenue and tax policy, community development, and urban revitalization. The school's graduate students were often active participants in the examination of many of these issues and were the principal beneficiaries of the program's activities, which were open to interested undergraduates as well. Shortly after the program was incorporated into the Research Center, Professor Nason suggested and Dean Stokes endorsed establishing an initiative that would enable the university to focus its intellectual resources on the search for solutions to some of the state's most pressing public sector challenges. The initiative's agenda, it was envisioned, would be informed by a select group of New Jerseyan thought leaders drawn from the academy, from government, business, labor, nonprofit, and faith-based sectors, with staff provided by the program. 1 year following the program's absorption by the Research Center, the Council on New Jersey Affairs was created, with financial support provided by the Florence and John Schumann Foundation. In the 9-year period during which the council was operational, its members included 3 former New Jersey governors, Richard Hughes, William Cahill, and Brendan Byrne, chief executives of major New Jersey corporations, Princeton and Rutgers University faculty members, prominent religious leaders, officers of the New Jersey League of Women Voters, prominent bankers and lawyers, and senior public and private sector labor union officials. The public policy topics explored by Princeton graduate students through participation in the activities sponsored by the Program for New Jersey Affairs were in large part many of the topics the council entertained. Its quarterly meetings at the Woodrow Wilson School served as a forum where public issues could be studied in depth and discussed in an atmosphere that allowed for frank exchange of ideas. Princeton faculty, program staff, policy experts from government and from think tanks contributed to the council's deliberations and in the research and analysis that informed their discussions. Graduate students were often participants in shaping the council's findings. These findings were shared with state and local government officials and other New Jerseyans through a series of white papers regularly released by the council. Indeed, a 500-page volume published jointly by the Research Center and the program in 1988 entitled New Jersey Issues Papers from the Council on New Jersey Affairs, highlighted the breadth of policy areas the Council had considered up to that point. The volume offered guidance on a wide swath of fiscal, infrastructure, educational, and demographic challenges the state confronted. And so, here we are today. The re-engagement of Princeton School of Public and International Affairs with the public policy infrastructure of New Jersey has been long hoped for and is now being realized. I believe SPIA in New Jersey brings together nicely Princeton's educational mission of service to its students and service to its home state that the Program for and the Council on New Jersey Affairs once sought to advance. Given what I know to be possible, I'm really excited about what lies ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Barnett. I'm a second-year MPA student, so I'm graduating in a month. But I'm a student here at SPIA, and I've really enjoyed it. As today's speakers will express, state and local governments have an incredibly important impact on our lives. In recent years, even more power has been given to the states, and we've all witnessed the importance of state and local government action when it comes to responses to the pandemic. I'm from New Jersey originally, a small town about half an hour away. Before coming to SPIA, I had the opportunity to work in state government in the New Jersey Governor's Office. There, I was working with the policy team on a variety of projects and initiatives that were designed to help people and address difficult issues, like increasing access to affordable health care, promoting local economic growth, and addressing racial wealth disparities. I learned so much in that role, and I loved that work, but I decided to go to SPIA so that I could get better at it. I wanted to make sure that I could tackle these problems with higher levels of understanding. I wanted to make sure that my work was actually moving the needle on issues that I cared about. That's why I'm so excited about SPIA in New Jersey. SPIA students certainly love their core academic studies, but we're also very passionate about public service, and we're hungry to help the community directly. That's why it's so important that SPIA is giving students the opportunity to get involved in state and local policymaking and advocacy through their clinics. I'm confident that increased ties between local organizations and the university and initiatives like the Garden State Fellowship will lead to more students giving back to the New Jersey community. And I just want to note that if you are a student at SPIA, undergraduate or graduate, you are a member of the New Jersey community. And I think you have a responsibility and a connection to the state. So I think a perfect example of a SPIA alum whose career exemplifies the ideals of public service and commitment to supporting the community is Chief Justice Rabner. Chief Justice Rabner is a New Jersey native who got his bachelor's degree here at Princeton SPIA. He went on to attend Harvard Law School, after which he clerked for Judge Dickinson Debevoise of the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. After his clerkship, he worked in the Office of the United States Attorney for the District of New Jersey for almost 2 decades, serving in roles such as First Assistant United States Attorney, Chief of the Terrorism Unit, and Chief of the Criminal Division. He then worked as Chief Counsel to Governor Corzine before being appointed as New Jersey's Attorney General. In 2007, he was appointed to serve as Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court and has continued in that position since. As Chief Justice, he not only leads the New Jersey Supreme Court in resolving legal disputes and issuing legal opinions, but he also serves an important role in managing the state's judiciary. Chief Justice Rabner has worked tirelessly to help the people of New Jersey, and we are so glad that he could join us today. Please join me in welcoming Chief Justice Stuart Rabner to the podium.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. You know, those were beautiful words, Jonathan. I thank you for them, but you left out something critically important to me. Jonathan and I will be working together next term. He's going to be a law clerk working in chambers. And thank you all very much for inviting me to participate in this launch of such an important program. I have to admit, I was a bit uncertain when I got the invitation because it's unusual for a judge to be invited to speak at a program that is focused on policy. You know, I think if you ask any incoming freshman about the roles of the three branches of government, I hope what they would say to you is that the legislative and executive branches make policy through the enactment of laws, and that the judiciary interprets those laws. Usually when the words judge and policymaking appear in the first sentence of an article, what follows is often not that complimentary. So please don't be surprised that I'm not going to speak about case law today. I do want to take a look at a provision in the state constitution that relates to the judiciary and its authority. It's Article 6, Section 2, Paragraph 3, and I'm sure many of you have this committed to memory. But for those who don't, this is what the Constitution says. The Supreme Court shall make rules governing the administration of all courts in the state and subject to law the practice and procedure in all such courts. There's a good amount of case law about the scope of that authority. For today, think of it as the court's exclusive rulemaking authority over judicial administration, the court's supervisory role over the justice system. Now, that authority has been used over the years in a number of ways, from developing a pretrial intervention program to coming up with a framework of rules for how the court would operate during the pandemic. The most relevant for today's discussion are a series of initiatives that the judiciary in New Jersey has embarked on over the last 15 years to try to make improvements in our civil and criminal justice systems. They range from requiring mediation in contested mortgage foreclosure cases dating back to 2008 at the height of the mortgage foreclosure crisis, to creating a new forum to resolve complex business disputes in 2014, ushering in various reforms for our municipal courts, which related to the excessive use of fines, fees, bench warrants that had a disparate impact on poor people and people of color, and more recent efforts to reduce discrimination in the way that we select juries and to try to assemble more representative juries in our system. Those and other efforts had a number of things in common. They started with the court creating broad-based committees of stakeholders, sometimes involving all three branches of governments. Committees would then gather, analyze information, discuss, come together with a report that contained a series of recommendations that, where the court had authority, it enacted on its own, and in other instances, referred the recommendations to the other two branches. Another important point is that many of these initiatives revolve around the analysis of data and the development of policy issues. And for that, we've welcomed the help of knowledgeable experts time and again. So let's talk about two ongoing initiatives. The first, criminal justice reform. The second, an initiative relating to mental health. The first area has commonly been referred to as bail reform, and it's received a good deal of attention. In the past decade, New Jersey has largely eliminated the use of cash bail and replaced it with a risk-based system. The prior system relied heavily on the use of monetary bail, as most states in the nation continue to do today, as the basis for pretrial release. And that system, we found, had two flaws. First, poor people who posed a minimal risk of danger or flight sat in jail for months on end, even though there were other ways their cases could have been handled, because they couldn't afford to post even modest amounts of bail. On the other end, individuals with access to money who posed significant risks of flight could be released if they put up that money. The path to reform began a decade ago when then Governor Christie proposed that our state adopt pretrial detention model for defendants similar to what existed on the federal level. The state legislature did not act on it. And what came next was quite significant. Dr. Marie Van Nostrand, an expert in data analytics and criminal justice, published a study of the state's pretrial jail population. She took a look at a single day in October of 2012 at the pretrial county jail population. This is what her report revealed. More than a third of the individuals being held in custody were there because they couldn't afford to post bail. And 12% of defendants, 1 out of 8, were there because they couldn't post up to $2,500 in bail, which meant they didn't have the 10%, the $250 that would be needed to go to a bail bondsman. The report presented an opportunity for us to broaden the conversation. So in June of 2013, the judiciary formed the Advisory Committee on Criminal Justice, and its 30 members included governor's counsel, senior staff from legislative leaders, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, a warden, sheriff, the ACLU, and a number of groups, the State Bar Association among them. I chaired the committee and I asked the Attorney General and the state's public defender, also a Princeton alum, if they would personally attend the meetings, which they did, and their reasonableness throughout this process was critical to its outcome. We met for 6 months, starting in the fall of that year, and examined both bail reform and the need for a Speedy Trial Act, which did not at the time exist in our state. And the committee issued a report in March of 2014 with 27 recommendations, as to which the entire group was nearly unanimous. 2 of the most important ones were, first, moving away from the heavy reliance on monetary bail and relying instead on more objective measures of risk to assess the level of risk of danger and risk of flight that each individual defendant would pose, so that for low-risk defendants, judges could release them on conditions that would be supervised by pretrial services officers without bail being imposed. And at the other end of the spectrum, the committee recommended a proposed constitutional amendment and a new statute to detain defendants in line with the governor's proposal. And the report called for a Speedy Trial Act. Not lost on anyone was the fact that these recommendations came from a group of individuals who didn't always see eye to eye. The response from the executive and the legislative branches was quite positive. They drafted legislation that encompassed the key recommendations and passed and signed into law a bill within 6 months of the report being released. Some points about the law are worth noting here just briefly. It places the burden on the state to prove that a defendant should be detained pre-trial. And that's because liberty is the norm in our society before there is a finding of guilt. And second, there are only 2 presumptions of detention in the bill that a defendant can rebut, and they are for cases that involve murder and those that expose a defendant to a potential sentence of life imprisonment. And the law also called for the use of objective risk assessment tools to inform judges as they make the decision whether to release a defendant, and if so, on what conditions. Now, during that time, we worked closely because the bill was slated to go into effect in January of 2017, which gave us, the Attorney General, and the Public Defender time to prepare. We worked closely with Dr. Van Nostrand and with the Arnold Foundation, a criminal justice foundation, on the development of this risk assessment tool. Up until that point, Dr. Van Nostrand and her work had reviewed data from more than 1 million cases nationwide, and we gave her access to hundreds of thousands of actual cases in New Jersey to assist in the development of a tool for us. I know that risk assessment tools are somewhat controversial. Here's what you should know about the New Jersey tool. It relies on 9 common sense factors about the crime charged, the defendant's background, and the defendant's criminal history. It's not a secret. Those factors are available on our website, and they are listed in each individual report that the tens of thousands of defendants each year get to see before their first hearing. And it is the judge, not the results of the risk assessment tool, that makes the decision looking at all relevant factors. To be sure, it's not a perfect system. No system can be when you're trying to predict human behavior. When you're trying to predict, will this person show up in court? Will they commit new crimes while on release awaiting their trial date. The judiciary has kept data since January of 2017, which reveals a number of things. First, bail is hardly used at all in the state today, roughly 1 in 1,000 cases. In the prior years, tens of thousands of cases each year. For the generally more serious cases, those where an individual is arrested on a warrant, roughly 80% of defendants are released on conditions, and the remainder are detained. And overall, defendants who have been released are showing up for court more than 90% of the time, the same as before the reform efforts, and they are not committing additional crimes at a rate notably higher than the prior system. We also saw a substantial reduction in the jail population of our state from 2017 until the start of COVID, when, for obvious reasons, in-person criminal trials could not be held and things were slowed down overall. The jail population today is comprised of a much higher percentage of individuals who are facing charges for very serious offenses, first and second-degree offenses. And it no longer includes poor people who pose minimal risk but couldn't afford bail. Since 2017, we've continued to work with Dr. Van Nostrand and also more recently with the Chicago Crime Lab, and have made changes in the decision-making framework based on the data that we've seen. There's been a fair amount of praise and criticism for this reform. Recently, with crime on the increase throughout the nation during the pandemic, some fingers were pointed at bail reform. And in New Jersey now, there are more than 24 bills pending with respect to the law to change it. Some of them seek to create additional presumptions for detention in a variety of areas, and the particular focus has been on carjackings, firearms, and auto theft. The likely result, if those changes were to be enacted, is that more people would be detained prior to trial, and that more black and brown defendants would be detained overall. Now, the judiciary, as I mentioned, has 5 full years of data with respect to all of the cases that we can look at to see whether defendants who've been released pre-trial have committed those particular crimes, which is relevant to the discussion, because if they haven't, that begs the question, does it make sense to tighten the law, to change the law in those particular areas? Now, in response to recent events, the judiciary reconvened the committee that included all of the stakeholders I mentioned, and we did so just months ago. We did so to try to examine the data, to see if there are areas where we can recommend reform to the legislature, to the governor's office, and to possibly dispel mistaken beliefs. We plan to issue a report next month, share it with the other branches. The report will be driven by data, by research, and based on analysis and discussion. And whatever one may think of the outcome of it, I am confident that SPIA and others would believe that's a sensible way to try to develop important policy in our state. Hold on to that thought. I want to come back to it after discussing one other initiative first. And that relates to how courts respond to individuals who suffer from mental illness and come into contact with our justice system. Across the nation, countless individuals who suffer from mental illness are arrested each year. Their cases typically proceed without attention being paid to the underlying problem, and then the cycle repeats again and again. If you scour the literature, you'll learn that there are a few proven techniques that can lead to dramatic improvements. Crisis intervention programs, where law enforcement officials are trained how to de-escalate situations in the field and the encounters they find themselves in. Developing a way to screen and assess individuals for mental illness in jail, right after they're arrested, or early on in the pretrial process. Hiring people to help defendants navigate the system, helping them develop individual case plans, and making referrals to existing support and treatment centers in the communities where they live, and monitoring an individual's progress through court appearances, through conferences, with opportunities for those charges to be downgraded or dismissed or diverted. If you scour the literature a bit more, you'll discover that Miami-Dade County is the gold standard for this program. And that's thanks to the sustained work of a judge by the name of Stephen Leifman. The results they've achieved are nothing short of remarkable. A substantial drop in the arrest rate, in the recidivism rate, and in the number of police shootings each year. New Jersey began to focus on this issue early in 2019. We first identified key partners who would be essential to a coordinated statewide effort, and we visited Miami together. Our delegation consisted of the Commissioner of the Department of Human Services, the Attorney General, senior lawyers who had expertise in this area in the Public Defender's Office, the Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts, and myself. And to make things as enticing as possible, I invited this delegation to go to Miami in August. Our initial focus has been on defendants who have been released after being charged with criminal offenses. And although the pandemic slowed down our process in the beginning, today we now have 4 pilot counties in our state, Essex, Morris, Camden, and Middlesex counties, where they are attempting to implement the key elements that we've gone over. At the same time, the Attorney General's office has embraced training and de-escalation. Prosecutors' offices are working on diversionary programs, and the Department of Human Services dedicated $2 million to fund behavioral health teams for these 4 pilot counties. As we monitor the progress of the pilots, we'll gather and analyze data, we'll make adjustments, and we'll look to expand this program, if at all possible, throughout the state. I wanted to share these examples with you today at this kickoff event for obvious reasons. They reflect just 2 pressing issues that our state is facing, and the judiciary's initiatives in both areas created a forum where we could discuss and analyze issues and identify steps that could be taken to address problems. And those discussions and others have benefited from the insights and the experience of subject matter experts, of practitioners, of scholars, of agencies that are engaged directly in policymaking. I don't have to tell you that throughout the nation, the leadership role this university plays is so widely known. And that applies to the School of Public and International Affairs as well. Its professors, its graduate fellows, and its students. What better place to turn to for assistance, to use your words, for research-based public policy that advances racial, social, and economic justice in the state of New Jersey. I trust you will find a way to convey that message to the legislative and executive branches. On behalf of the judiciary, I say we look forward to working with you on challenging issues, and I congratulate you on today's launch. I wish you success for a very simple reason. It will help the people of our state. I'm sorry I can't stay with you all morning, and I have a feeling that the next panel may raise issues that will come before the court. So I will take my leave, and thank you all very, very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's really fantastic to see so many friends gathered here in Robertson today. It makes me feel like I'm back in grad school here. It is a deep honor for me to be here to join you all for the launch of SPIA in New Jersey. As an alum of this program and a practitioner in state and local government, and having worked here and tried to help students get interested in state and local government as a career, this is super exciting for me, and I'm glad you're all here today. And what better way to kick things off than to talk about housing policy and Mount Laurel. Now, SPIA in New Jersey is a broad-based initiative, right? So why housing, you might ask? Well, when you think about it, housing is a little bit of everything. It's not just about shelter and economics. It's about health. It's about education, economic development, environmental justice. It's tax policy. And of course, it's about race, segregation, and wealth inequality. And housing policy is one place where New Jersey really is unique because of the Mount Laurel Doctrine. Unlike anywhere else in America, towns in New Jersey are legally obligated to provide access to their fair share of affordable housing. Now, I first learned about Mount Laurel right here in this building, actually, in a class taught by David Kinsey. That was back in 2002 when, comparatively speaking, Mount Laurel was working. Not perfect, but working. The executive branch's Council on Affordable Housing, or COA, was approving towns' municipal housing plans. Units were getting built, some, not enough, but some. And where compliance lagged, developers could go to court to try to get their housing projects approved over local objections. And I figured it would stay that way, and I wouldn't really worry about it anyway, because what were the odds that I'd ever be in New Jersey working on affordable housing? But you never know where life's going to take you, and mine brought me back to New Jersey in 2013, and I got a job developing affordable housing. So I pulled out my Kinsey lecture notes, got to work. But at that point, the story was very different. Executive leadership had changed. Affordable housing was no longer a priority, and in fact, the governor was doing everything he could to undermine COA. So here's where it gets interesting. It turns out you can't just kill affordable housing in New Jersey. The court stepped in and said, wait a minute, if the executive isn't going to uphold these constitutional rights, we will. And they did. The courts stepped in. And the third housing round proceeded through municipal court settlements that Adam and other panelists will be talking about shortly. And the result has been basically that over the since 2015, we've created over 21,000 deed restricted units in this state. Again, not enough, but it's progress. So fast forward again to today, the Murphy administration is investing in affordable housing development like never before. But despite this progress, New Jersey, along with the rest of the country, still faces significant challenges in housing affordability. So as a housing policy advisor to the governor, I've had the chance to talk to some of my cohorts in other states about what are they doing to try to address housing supply issues. And what it sort of boils down to in a lot of cases is that they're trying to emulate Mount Laurel, or the way that Mount Laurel helps New Jersey in using executive or legislative approaches. But unfortunately, we know that politically, passing legislation in this space is very, very difficult, as the state of New York is finding out. And we know from New Jersey's experience, among others, that executive action is only good until the executive changes priorities and does not remain committed to those goals. So that's why in its report this week on Mount Laurel, the Fair Share Housing Center, its list of ways that states can build on New Jersey's success starts with this. Number one, create a baseline legal requirement that municipalities must provide their fair share of affordable housing. Now, that's it. That's the key. And that constitutional foundation and legal foundation for our work is what makes New Jersey different in housing policy. And it's a great reason to be optimistic, in my view, about the future. And it's also a great reason to be excited about our next panel, where affordable housing all-stars are going to take us deeper into this issue. So with that, I'd like to thank you all again for coming, and I'm going to introduce the panel's moderator, Matt Mleczko, and ask the panel to join us up front. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, and good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you. My name is Matt Malechko. I'm a doctoral candidate in population studies and social policy in the joint degree program in social policy here at SPIA, as well as the Office of Population Research. I study housing policy, primarily the policies that will help us promote affordable housing and integration. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited and honored to moderate this panel. I first want to thank our SPIA leadership, including Dean Jamal and Dr. Stacy Mann, not only for ushering in the SPIA New Jersey initiative, but also for making this important discussion about the Mount Laurel Doctrine a key part of this launch event. I'd also like to thank the many SPIA administrative staff who worked tirelessly to make this, this panel and event happen. I'm joined today by an impressive panel of experts who will help us reflect on the evolution of the Mount Laurel Doctrine and what the future holds for fair and affordable housing in New Jersey moving forward. Our panelists include Adam Gordon, Executive Director of the Fair Share Housing Center, Michelle Delesfort, former 3-term mayor and current committeewoman in Union Township, and Principal and Managing Partner of the Nishwan Group, an urban planning firm based in Montclair, New Jersey, Janae Johnson, Director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, and the Governor's Office Liaison to the Wealth Disparity Task Force. And finally, Dr. David Kinsey, longtime visiting lecturer at SPIA. I too learned most of what I know about the Mount Laurel Doctrine from David's class, and also a partner at Kinsey & Hand. So please join me in welcoming this panel. So our panel, Mount Laurel at 40, The Past and Future of Affordable Housing, commemorates the 40th anniversary of Mount Laurel II, a 1983 New Jersey Supreme Court decision that upheld the Mount Laurel decision of 1975, known as Mount Laurel I, that established the obligation of all New Jersey municipalities to provide their fair share of affordable housing. Importantly, the Mount Laurel II decision led to the New Jersey Fair Housing Act of 1985, which transferred oversight of the Mount Laurel Doctrine from the judiciary to the Council on Affordable Housing, otherwise known as COA, the state agency that would implement the Mount Laurel Doctrine over successive rounds. Unfortunately, efforts to undermine the Mount Laurel Doctrine rendered COA defunct, and for much of the 21st century, enforcement of the Mount Laurel Doctrine was paltry, if not non-existent. Then, in a 2015 decision known as Mount Laurel IV, which resulted from litigation from the Fair Share Housing Center, the New Jersey State Supreme Court transferred implementation of the Mount Laurel Doctrine back to the trial courts, enabling Fair Share Housing Center to enter into third-round settlement agreements with over 340 municipalities across the state. Having studied the impact of the Mount Laurel IV decision on affordable housing production in New Jersey with the Fair Share Housing team for its recently released report, Dismantling Exclusionary Zoning, New Jersey's Blueprint for Overcoming Segregation, I can say that all the evidence strongly suggests that stronger enforcement of the Mount Laurel Doctrine has led to far more overall multifamily housing and affordable housing construction statewide than in previous decades. Since 2015, New Jersey has not only seen a major uptick in multifamily housing building permits issued, but an overall shift away from single-family permits and towards multifamily permits. In total, close to 70,000 units of multifamily housing associated with Mount Laurel obligations have been constructed since 2015. This represents 89% of all multifamily units built in the state of New Jersey since 2015. Nearly 22,000 of these units are deed-restricted affordable housing units, representing critically needed housing units for our very low, and moderate income neighbors, as well as our senior and special needs neighbors. This represents a dramatic increase in affordable housing development compared to historical development. From 1980 to 2014, combined production from municipalities across the state totaled just under 1,500 units of affordable housing per year. From 2015 to 2022, participating municipalities produced a combined total of over 2,700 affordable units per year. These are housing units that are almost certainly the driving force behind unmistakable increases in racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity in neighborhoods like one in West Windsor, just minutes away from us, that was featured in Fair Share's report. And these units represent only a subset of the total number of third-round units that will ultimately be produced. Make no mistake, our state still faces a major deficit of affordable housing units, along with other housing challenges, deeply entrenched racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic segregation, and still some of the worst offenders in terms of exclusionary zoning and land use policies. Yet we finally have evidence of changes in the right direction since 2015. This represents a major step forward for fair and affordable housing in New Jersey and should give us a renewed sense of what might be possible in the fourth round and moving forward. So to help us reflect on the significance of the Mount Laurel Doctrine and its capacity to promote equity and inclusion across our state, I invite each of our panelists to share their reflections on the importance of the Mount Laurel Doctrine, especially as it relates to their line of work. And this morning we'll start with Michelle, and then we'll move through the panel. So Michelle.
Matt. Good morning, everybody. So the question is, I have two different perspectives. I'm a professional planner. I've been doing planning for roughly 30 years, and the majority of my career I've worked in urban centers. I can say this about the Mount Laurel Doctrine is it did incentivize the creation of affordable housing, and it gave a platform to community development corporations and private developers to develop affordable housing in municipalities that otherwise would not have them. It also really did a good job of creating an incentive for inclusionary zoning ordinances. I work with those often now. I believe they are extremely essential, especially in our current market. And given the due to the Mount Laurel Doctrine, I think that was the impetus for that. And finally, just it really encouraged the creation of mixed income households. We find that nowadays more often, particularly in redevelopment projects, but Mount Laurel was a good way of trying to establish economic prosperity amongst different income brackets, and so mixed income, the development of mixed income housing, I believe, comes from that as well. On a personal level, I can say, sadly, I think the doctrine, of course, was written for the best intentions, but it also put a stigma on affordable housing. And that stigma really speaks to who lives in affordable housing. The most typically people, when you think affordable housing, if they're not in the industry, they immediately think poor people, people who may not have the best education or financial means, single moms that have absentee fathers in their household and a lot of children. Or they may just look at it as housing for poor Black and brown populations. And so, that stigma is something that we have to constantly delete from people's minds and educate them about what affordable housing really is, who lives in affordable housing, and what are the benefits and the tenets of affordable housing. I also feel like the doctrine sadly created loopholes for some municipalities that really didn't want to have affordable housing in their communities, primarily because of the misconception that I mentioned earlier about what affordable housing is. And so we saw things like regional contribution agreements where your more affluent municipalities would essentially send 50% of their obligations to receiving municipalities and urban centers. And what that did is it created a level of segregation in those centers because, certain large parcels were identified, and then again, you had certain populations, certain racial and income mixes segregated within certain districts within a community. I also think, the award of 25% of your obligation would be satisfied if you develop senior housing. While our senior community is definitely in need of affordable housing, I think it detracted from, your young families and, just professional families that really needed it. So all that to say, I think we still have a lot of work to do. There was a lot of development that occurred. Sadly, not as much affordable housing development, but a lot of development has occurred since then. But in my opinion, there's still more work to.
Thank you, Michelle. Adam?
I agree with much of that, and pretty much all of that, actually, and hope we get into more of that as the panel goes on. I think that this is all a constant struggle and a work in progress, and we've built as Matt has done, and Matt deserves a round of applause for the amazing research he did those data were not easy to pull together, and it's with our system of home rule where everyone has individual. Come forward. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So I was just saying that the data Matt mentioned was in our system of home rule very hard to piece together, and he did an amazing job of doing it. Something actually Dean Jamal said this morning made me think of a quote that I looked up and hadn't in a while from one of Chief Justice Rabner's predecessors, who appropriately wrote the Mount Laurel II decision, Chief Justice Valence. And he, about 7 years after writing that decision, spoke at the Rutgers Law School commencement, also appropriate because General Farmer, who will be speaking later today, has served as dean of that law school. And he said, "The separateness of our society is horrible, and it is not getting better. We must not become blind to it. We must see it, and we must deal with it. Not in order to become rich, not in order to become safe, not even to be fair, although all of that, but to be a happy society at home with each other, at ease with each other, friends and neighbors, not enemies." And to me, that's what this work is about. We live in a state that probably, at this point, is majority people of color. And yet you can go to communities in which and I think a lot of this is what Michelle was saying, that these very wealthy, very white communities that have walled themselves off from the reality of the racially and economically diverse strength that we have, a state that we have. And I think that is detrimental to all of us, including the people in those communities. And I think that the real importance of Mount Laurel and when it succeeds, the success of it is about breaking down those barriers, not just by building homes, but more critically for the people in those homes and for the broader communities. In our report, we not only talk about the data that Matt mentioned, but also we give examples of communities where there's been an impact and sort of a change in how the community overall looks at the racial and ethnic and economic diversity of our state. And I'll just briefly mention one of those examples is Cherry Hill, which is where our office is. We spent years fighting against. There's a very important case that went to the state Supreme Court about Cherry Hill's refusal to construct affordable housing. And then really, right around the time of the Mount Laurel 4 decision, something really changed there. There was enough of a combination of, I think, the pressure from the legal system and a change in leadership that had more openness to this. And we were able to reach a comprehensive settlement for Cherry Hill's affordable housing obligations that since has led to hundreds of new affordable homes and has led to increasing racial and economic diversity in that town. And incredibly, a group of black high school students, in response to the murder of George Floyd, organized to demand a required African American studies class in the high schools in Cherry Hill, which no other city or town in New Jersey has ever had. And if you had told me at the start of my career 20 years ago that Cherry Hill would vote to become the first place in New Jersey after decades of resisting their fair housing obligations, the first place in New Jersey to include African American history in their curriculum, I would have told you that, no way. But that is really the kind of change that we're aiming for. It's not just about the homes built, it's certainly about the impact on people's lives, but it is about all of our communities recognizing the strength of our multiracial, multi-ethnic community and seeing that as what we want to pass along to our kids. And I think about this very much as a parent of young kids, as opposed to the model of segregation that's prevailed in the past.
Thank you, Adam. Nay?
Thank you for the question, Matt. The first thought that comes to my mind thinking of this is really the legacy of sacrifice. But before getting there, I just wanted to first say congratulations, Dean Jamal, Professor Mann and Professor Howard for this amazing launch of SPIA in New Jersey. It is, really in tandem with the Governor's Fellows relaunch that we have announced this year, and this week, that models this effort to really train and give exposure to leaders within state government, within our cabinet department. So we're really excited about this, the launch of the Governor's Fellows, the relaunch of this program. This week I see Liz, who's one of our fellows that's working with us, and Kate and Matt. So really excited to work with you all. It's also an awesome opportunity that the Murphy-Oliver administration has really given me in establishing this Office of Equity. And so this work really joins in and really our collective efforts around Executive Order 327, which opens up opportunities for folks who have some or no degree college work to have opportunities in state government. And so we understanding that the perspectives and the backgrounds that come from a wide cross-section of our residents really helps to strengthen our state work and our state workforce. And so this really is a complement to what you all are developing here, and so really excited for this opportunity. But when I think about this discussion, the legacy of sacrifice, I think of the Ethels. Ethel Lawrence, obviously, but you also think back to Ethel and J.D. Shelley, who in 1945 had sought out and scouted a community that they wanted to bring their family into, a two-story modest dwelling that they chose. And yet they were restricted because of a racially restrictive covenant. And it was their desire to own a piece of America, to make our democracy true to its ideals, that led to precedent that really opened up opportunity for what we're even standing in the wake of today. So we really look at this landmark decision that came from their small, modest sacrifice that turned into a litigation challenge and battle that resulted in the 1948 case of Shelley versus Kramer, that gave the precedent that opened up the opportunity for our Mount Ephraim, New Jersey family of John D. Jones and Lillian Jones to have an opportunity to remain in the property that they owned here in New Jersey when they were being challenged by a racially restrictive covenant in our state in 1948. So the precedent from the Shelley Kramer case in Missouri with the U.S. Supreme Court gave precedent for a family here in New Jersey to remain in their home just a month later in June of 1948. So those the sacrifice of those, small families and just working class individuals who are just looking to own and to really have the ideals to pursue happiness as we've been promised, the guaranteed. That's really the legacy that we are building on when we look at Ethel Lawrence's sacrifice and her fight here. And so that legacy of sacrifice is modeled in our Lieutenant Governor, Sheila Oliver. It's a legacy of sacrifice that we've seen that's opened up opportunities for immigrants and for women and given a gateway of opportunities for protected classes. But it starts with individuals standing for the guarantees that they've been given and being able to build on that. And so that really is an important and crucial piece that I hope we don't miss in this conversation. And I think it echoes the mayor's point that this is really what, these are the families, these are the individuals that we are looking to see opportunity be given to. And that really is, they are entitled to these, their rights. Housing is our right here in the state.
Thank you, Janae. And David.
First, thanks to the Dean and this wonderful school for re-recognizing the state of New Jersey. 15 years ago, this school held a symposium on Mount Laurel II at 25. Closing remarks from the late John Payne, professor of law at Rutgers Law School. We are apt today, and some of you were at that event. John concluded, talking about the great accomplishments under Mount Laurel II, that it is my earnest wish that the next time we assemble on a celebratory occasion, sooner than 25 years from now, I also hope, we will not only be able to describe a New Jersey in which all of our citizens are well and affordably housed, but also to have demonstrated that a sensitive interaction between the judiciary and the political branches based on constitutional principle is the way to get it done. Won't that be cause for celebration indeed? Well, we're not quite stage of achieving John's vision, but it's still an important marker that he laid down for us all to strive for. What's the significance of the Mount Laurel Doctrine? Well, first, it's the raw numbers. Affordable housing that has been built, let's say since 1980 when COA started counting, let's call that 70, 80,000 units of income-restricted, deed-restricted affordable housing, plus maybe another 10 plus outside the Mount Laurel system, but still affordable housing that's been built in that same period. All that's really important. Also important is the market rate housing that's been built. The inclusionary developments with 20% set-asides, so that there are apartments, there are townhouses built in communities that did not allow that type of development. Mount Laurel 1 called for a variety and choice of housing as the standard, and then there was a retreat to focus simply on lower income housing for the lower 2/5 of the population. But what has been accomplished under Mount Laurel 2 does address variety and choice, and you can see it all around the state, all the multifamily construction taking place, all the special needs housing that's being built. All that is a direct result of Mount Laurel. Not to throw too much of a damper on celebration, though, is a recognition of how much housing has been built in New Jersey. So since 1980, about 1 million additional housing units have been created in New Jersey. That's the net change in the housing stock over this period. And compare that million with the 50, 60, 70, 80,000 affordable units. The need, of course, is huge. We're all aware of nationwide housing crisis. Again, some numbers. If New Jersey has 3.2 million households, and 1 million plus of those are income at the Mount Laurel range, the lower 2/5 of the population, perhaps 80% of them are income eligible for affordable housing. They spend more than 30% of their income today for housing. They are qualified. Yet the New Jersey system of defining what's fair share does not include those who are cost burdened, who spend too much of their income. Our fair share system has a fair share that's calculated on two different components. First, what's the amount of substandard housing in a community that's currently occupied by lower income households? And secondly, what's the fair share of the regional need for housing based on a projection of population and households and lower income households over the next 10 years. Yes, it's distributed fairly, but it has nothing to do with the income of people who currently are unable to afford housing and the other basic essentials of life. So there's much to continue to keep on doing to create more affordable, more inclusive, more diverse communities in New Jersey. New Jersey is a leader in the nation. During the late 80s and 1990s, New Jersey built more income-restricted affordable housing to the lower 2/5 of households by income per capita per year than any other state. Far more than California and Massachusetts would be number 1 and 2, or 2 and 3. And because of the efforts since Mount Laurel 4 in 2015, I'm sure New Jersey was risen again back to the pack after suffering through this terrible moratorium gap period of 16 years where governors, commissioners of community affairs, COA, were brilliant in their efforts to delay the full implementation of the Mount Laurel Doctrine. They played it beautifully. Finally, the Supreme Court stepped in 2015 and said, we really meant it. You really have an obligation. This is what's really important. So what we're going to do, go back to what worked before in the mid-'80s. And so that's what started the process going again. And even as we went through the first beginnings of trials, towns said, well, wait a minute, we're 2015. The fair share is just the next 10 years, isn't it? Well, what about 1999 to 2015? Oh, that doesn't matter, said a trial court. Said the appellate division on appeal. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court in Mount Laurel 5 in 2017 said, oh, it's not that easy to get away from that obligation. The fair share is everything since 1999. So it's always a struggle, and one reason that explains New Jersey's success, and here, complete full disclosure, I have been an expert, a semi-pro bono paid expert for Fair Share Housing Center since 2002. So I will say unabashedly that a very important, critical reason for the success of Mount Laurel is Adam Gordon, his predecessor, Kevin Walsh, all the staff attorneys, Peter Connor, who created Fair Share Housing Center. It is essential. It's unique in the nation as an enforcement mechanism for affordable housing. But without Fair Share Housing Center, we would have nothing to talk about today, except to bemoan how sad it is New Jersey doesn't have affordable housing.
All right, thank you, David.
End of today's lecture.
So one important aspect of the Mount Laurel Doctrine, picking up on Jeffrey's reflection of housing policy's wide reach, is its multiple objectives and the multiple ways we can measure its impact. So I'll pose the following questions for our panelists and invite them to answer whichever one resonates with them, or even to put forward another aspect of the Mount Laurel Doctrine for us to consider. So 1, how does the Mount Laurel Doctrine promote the equitable distribution of affordable housing across New Jersey communities, and why does this matter? 2, how does the Mount Laurel Doctrine promote housing development in a way that is consistent with sustainable development and smart growth principles? And 3, why do rental and affordable home ownership opportunities made possible by the Mount Laurel Doctrine matter for our state's racial wealth gap? This time we'll go in reverse order, so I'll start with David.
Mount Laurel II decision gave birth to 2 state laws and 2 state agencies, State Fair Housing Act and COA, but also the State Planning Act and the State Planning Commission. That's in part because the Supreme Court in Mount Laurel II realized that not all parts of New Jersey were appropriate for intensive additional growth. There were important parts that ought to be preserved, and there's a nuanced approach to be taken. So the court had relied upon a document called the State Development Guide Plan, a draft document to help delineate where growth should or should not take place. And so the result was a State Planning Commission, which put together a state development and redevelopment plan, 2 versions of it. The current one, unfortunately, dates from 2001. But it does delineate broad planning regions in the state, has lots of policies of what should or should not happen, and has been used throughout the fair share process as a way of allocating housing need. So to the extent that a municipality has developable land, depending upon its planning region, is one of the factors that goes in determining how large the fair share that's allocated to municipality. Secondly, the policies in the state plan have found their way into the standards that are used for the siting of affordable housing, in part through the rules that we still rely upon from COA from the 80s and 90s and aughts that spell out common sense approaches, but to avoid wetlands, avoid flood hazard areas, et cetera. So all of those are principles of sustainable development and smart growth, although not necessarily called that at that time. Those are incorporated in local decision-making.
Thank you, David. Janae.
New Jersey has far too many, as United Way would describe, asset-limited, income-constrained, yet employed families. And our administration has been focused, whether it's universal pre-K, raising the minimum wage, to address the affordability issues in the state. But there are far too many of these families. And part of what the work of the Lieutenant Governor and other co-chairs of the Wealth Disparity Task Force has been looking to examine and the causes of and the remedies for the wealth disparities that we see in our state. And so a part of the governor's proposed budget included, with the support of Fair Share, Eric Dobson, and I see Brandon McCoy and others who are on the task force, to look at opportunities and ways to expand these home ownership measures for first-generation homeowners, particularly, who are a part of the first-time home buyer, often pool, but are disproportionately often people of color. And so in the governor's budget, there is now down payment assistance program targeting or looking at individuals who are first in their generation home buyers. And so that program now will be considered by the legislature for funding. And so there are opportunities that we're looking at within the budget to see how can we better support these Alice families and individuals who have not had the full range of opportunity for economic mobility in our state. And so those are, measures that we are endeavoring and really focused particularly on this task force to look at, because there is a direct connect between some of these systemic issues that we're seeing in our state and the wealth gap that currently exists.
Thank you, Janae. Adam.
Yeah, I mean, that work of the Wealth Disparity Task Force is critically important. We will become, if the governor's proposal is enacted, and thank you, Janae, for crediting the leadership of my colleague, Reverend Eric Dobson, on that, the biggest jurisdiction yet in the nation to have a first-generation homeownership program. I'm sorry, I'm doing the same thing. If the proposal for first-generation homeownership is enacted, we'll become the biggest jurisdiction yet in the country to have a first-generation homeownership program. We really appreciate the leadership of Janae and of the Murphy-Oliver administration in proposing that. And I think something else, just to that point, is one of the things we've heard anecdotally. I don't know if there's a way that maybe the something SPIA can help with to formally study this. I think a lot of people in places like Mount Laurel who have gotten access to affordable housing, then you're paying 30% of your income for housing and not 50 or 60%. And we've seen, and David was part of this team of researchers also here at Princeton that wrote the book Climbing Mount Laurel, which really talks about also how people in affordable housing through Mount Laurel have basically been able to get higher income jobs, gain more wealth. And so a pattern we've often seen is people going from being in that affordable rental housing to being able to buy homes. And I think that is something that is also really important, because the reality is, with how broken our housing market is already in New Jersey, it is very hard for someone to go right from paying 60% of their income from rent to becoming a homeowner. Although we hope that the first generation initiatives will help make that transition quicker. The point that I think people haven't covered, so I'll briefly touch on it, is about the fair distribution. And so something that's really interesting about how Mount Laurel works is that we don't have the same percentage for every town, which is actually like what, for example, Governor Hochul was proposing in New York. And so, for example, West Windsor's obligation, for those of you familiar with this area, has always been higher than Hamilton's. And Hamilton's a much bigger town, but it's also a much more racially and economically diverse town than West Windsor is. West Windsor's gotten far more economic development and jobs in the past few decades than Hamilton has. And those are factors that are taken into account, and I think is where the name fair share comes from, in addition to the planning factors that David already mentioned. And I think that that is really important and something distinctive about our system, because it really is not fair to ask, places like a Hamilton, or frankly, Union Township is a place that's similarly situated, to be treated the same as places that really have been totally exclusionary for decades, and that is factored in to the way the formulas are done. And you also get lower obligations if you have more existing affordability. And I think that's a really critical feature. People sometimes say that makes it more complex, but if it were a simple percentage of housing stock or something like that, it really would be very unfair to a community like a Hamilton or Union Township.
Thank you, Adam. And Michelle?
So I think, just to start off with, right, we're all looking, everybody deserves a place to live that's clean, that's safe, that's beautiful and affordable. And as it speaks to the principles of smart growth, that's what smart growth is aimed to do, right? It's a principle that essentially wants to foster economic prosperity, socioeconomic, equity, and also environmental sustainabilities. And so the Mount Laurel Doctrine, I believe, actually did a good job of speaking to those principles. It really fostered the creation, again, of mixed income housing, the compact design that Smart Principles promotes is also found in your Mount Laurel Doctrine principles. We're no longer creating communities or projects that are, located on a large vacant land outside of the general population. The compact design that Smart Principle perpetuates is one of infill housing. And that's what we're seeing today with the mixed income affordable housing that's being developed. I think overall, we're making communities, especially that allow affordable housing and that more walkable, more pedestrian friendly, more safe. And in my opinion, it's just extremely important that we expose the tenants and residents of affordable housing to economic opportunities. And so to that end, as it relates to making sure that every municipality isn't necessarily following a cookie cutter approach, I think is absolutely fantastic, quite honestly, because you're right. You have municipalities that may have more of a need for affordable housing, and then you have some municipalities that may want to make sure that they balance their ownership and their rental rate. But at the same time, they want to provide opportunities for those who meet the affordable criteria to own properties as well.
Great, thank you, Michelle. For our last set of questions, I'd like us to ponder the future of the Mount Laurel Doctrine. So I'll again invite our panelists to contemplate and answer one or more of the following questions. So what are some examples of municipalities with ambitious, forward-thinking third-round fair share plans, and how might this promote ambitious fourth-round plans? What lessons does the Mount Laurel Doctrine provide for other states? And what are some ways we might strengthen the foundation of the Mount Laurel Doctrine and its multiple objectives? So we'll start with Michelle.
I'm going to go back to regional contribution agreements as it relates to lessons that we should provide to other states. I think we need to hold all municipalities accountable and ensure that, again, everybody has equal housing opportunities and, essentially opportunities to live where you want to or, close to your job. Other states, what happened in New Jersey, and I worked for an urban municipality at the time when RCAs was at its height. And, to this day, it really had not necessarily the best impact. And I say that because you find a lot of urban centers where the majority of the housing stock is rental. There's not a lot of ownership. As we know, as time goes on, the market doesn't necessarily balance itself out. And I felt that we were giving those people who may have been disenfranchised or may not have, the right educations or the economic opportunities to own a house, we put them in a disadvantage. And so I would suggest, Mount Laurel, one of the lessons that other states should learn is to really perpetuate affordable housing in all areas, particularly in areas that have economic opportunities, so that people who don't have them, are exposed to that. I would also say that, let's try to mitigate the loopholes. Let's really establish, a common ground where there aren't so many conditions or exceptions for, your more affluent municipalities to move away from providing affordable housing.
Thank you, Michelle. Adam?
Agree with all of that, and so maybe I'll answer a different question. I will comment on the last part of what Michelle said, which is that there is this great irony, or maybe that's not quite the word for it, that a lot of these affluent municipalities basically have advocated for these loopholes, and then they say the system's so complicated. There's all these different things you could do, and why is it that you have to do all of this stuff when they basically are the ones that politically push to create those loopholes. So, but I'll go to the good examples of plans. I mean, I think the good news is that there's actually a lot of good examples of plans, and thinking about the audience. And I will say, I mean, Union Township they've built a lot of housing and done a very nuanced, interesting plan in terms of what they've done. I'll note, thinking about you mainly being based in Mercer County, an example that's nearby, or maybe two quick examples. I mean, first, Princeton. I see the council presidents in the audience, and a lot of other people I know from Princeton. Princeton, it took a long time. Princeton was one of the two towns that went through a 40-day trial, but I think that a lot of the things that are going on right now are really, really positive developments. I think it's really important for those of you who live here to engage here, because there's also a lot of opposition, and there's a lot of people who I think you know, come up with ways that they say, and we see this, I think, in a lot of the Princeton-like towns in New Jersey, that they say, oh, well, I like affordable housing, but, you know, what I really, it's not quite right done this way, or, you know, it's, you know, yeah, why can't we do it? So it's, you know, something that's just totally impractical, right? And so I think it's important for people to engage here, but I do think there's a lot of things. I think particularly the shopping center project is great. I love projects like that. We're seeing a lot of them around the state of, you know, revitalizing shopping centers that are, you know, have extra space and making them into more mixed income, mixed use spaces. And the Princeton Shopping Center project is a great one. The other one I'll mention locally that I've worked really hard on, and I'm really excited is now being built, is Hopewell. So Hopewell, as many of you know, basically had Capitol Health's main campus relocated from Trenton there, and I think this is one of, you know, the critical link between housing and health. I mean, I think it is very unfortunate that the state allowed Capitol Health to relocate from Trenton to Hopewell for many reasons. But that having happened, you know, Hopewell initially then added insult to injury by basically not allowing any housing for people who worked at the hospital around the hospital. And we fought, you know, it was actually originally part of the same trial, eventually reached a resolution, and there are now a really interesting mixed kind of everything, mixed income, mixed use, mixed age, there's sort of assisted living that's connected to the hospital, development of over 2,000 homes, over 400 affordable homes that is now being built surrounding the new Capitol Health Hospital. And one of the really exciting things that just happened there, and I see a couple colleagues from Homefront in the room, is that 26 of those affordable homes are going to be purchased by Homefront and used as permanent supportive housing for families experiencing or at risk of homelessness. I think that's a great example for other places to follow.
Thank you, Adam and Janae.
Looking at the future, the administration is looking, I think, broad spectrum when we look at opening up opportunities for developers, looking at opportunities to help families to mobilize to help give them better options for their housing choices. I think working with municipalities, there's just a broad section, a comprehensive approach that we want to take, building on the work that has been done. There's much more work to do, and many of the folks that are in this room are a big part of what we need as a coalition and collaboration and a collaborative effort towards making progress for our children and for the families in our state.
Thank you, Janae. And David.
The future. Helps, I think, to look back first. I've been involved in Mount Laurel since about 1976, where I'm at DEP, faced with casino gambling and rapid development taking place in the region. DEP adopted a rule saying large-scale region-shaping developments had to have a set-aside of affordable housing and relied upon Mount Laurel 1 as the basis for that rule. Roundly criticized, you can't do that, but ultimately the Supreme Court, after Mount Laurel 2, said, of course, that's perfectly reasonable under the Coastal Area Facility Review Act. A year later, after the State Fair Housing Act had been passed, the legislature specifically repealed any authority DEP would have under CAFRA to require such a set-aside, and did the same thing for the Pineland Protection Act. It's been a rocky road. There was a period, late 80s, early 90s, when a lot of affordable housing was built. The COA system kind of worked, but then this 16-year gap. 16 years, that is a very long period. And it took quite a struggle. It took 3 tries before the Supreme Court finally, in 2015, said, we really mean it, let's go back and do it again. Do the system that worked. And so here we are coming toward the end of the 3rd round, ends in 2025, and we are faced with coming up with, again, a fair share methodology. Adam mentioned there was a 40-day trial. Stop and think about it. 40 days of trial. We've had 2 fair share trials. One was 8 days, the second was 40 days. We are using methodologies that were created in the 80s. Here we are many decades ahead. For the substantive standards that guide developing municipal housing elements and fair share plans, we have the standards that were developed in the mid-80s and 90s, the rules adopted by COA, an agency that no longer exists. We don't really have a mechanism in place for going forward. Yes, there are bills in the legislature to do something. One would force the governor to name members of COA to revitalize COA somehow. Another would push back the 4th round, the beginning point, for several more years. We don't have a legislative response, but fortunately, we do have a very strong foundation, and that's Mount Laurel doctrine in Supreme Court decisions. All of the key Mount Laurel decisions of the Supreme Court since 1975 have been, Adam will correct me if I'm wrong, unanimous. And we have a bipartisan tradition of our highest judiciary. So the foundation is healthy, but it sometimes takes a while for the sufficient prodding, litigation to get to a result that leads to something happening, and that's what happened in 2015, reiterated in 2017. The future, frankly, my crystal ball is vague as to what will happen, but I'm very confident that Fair Share Housing Center will continue and do an even better, more expansive job of trying to get New Jersey to be more inclusive and more affordable for more.
Great, thank you, David. And with that, our time is up. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but we are breaking right after this, so I invite anyone who has, whose this conversation has inspired questions, please find me and the panelists. We'll be happy to talk with you during the break. I want to thank all the audience members for your time and attention, and I encourage you to go to fairsharehousing.org, where you can find the referenced report, Dismantling Exclusionary Zoning, New Jersey's Blueprint for Overcoming Segregation, and other great resources on this topic. But in closing, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for sharing their insights. Sorry, I couldn't catch you.
But we'll get started. I want to thank Dean Jamal, Professor Mann, and so many others at SPIA for pushing forward on SPIA's commitment to its home state and the issues of the people of New Jersey. I should say that while I'm a native New Yorker who never imagined I would live in New Jersey, much less work for the state. So shout out to many of my classmates and professors who convinced me that New Jersey is a great place to live and work, many of whom are today. I am very glad to see SPIA make this important step to recognize the importance of state and local issues, particularly here in New Jersey. My name is Emily Apple, and I'm a SPIA MPA alum and now the Director of Economic Security at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. And I have the honor and privilege to introduce this incredible panel of accomplished women making progress on an important issue here in New Jersey and across the country, maternal and infant health. Just to set the stage, in a country that already lags behind its peers on maternal and infant mortality and morbidity, New Jersey is behind. On the whole, New Jersey falls behind the national average in protecting new mothers. 24.1 mothers die in childbirth in New Jersey for every 100,000 live births, compared with 20.1 nationally. But even that